Welcome back to another episode of Wide Open Throttle. I'm your host this week, as both Jesse Lang and Angus McKenzie are out on assignment. So we're going to start with a very controversial topic, one that we hear a lot about in our comments every time the latest and greatest high-performance vehicle is released. Apparently, a lot of you out there consider yourself to be true enthusiasts, and for you, that means a car must have a manual transmission, rear drive, and a lot of horsepower. Well, a lot of the manufacturers these days disagree with you, and they're coming out with vehicles that incorporate, fast shifting automatics, dual clutch transmissions, hybrid drive systems, in some cases, all-wheel drive. So I'll put it to the group. Why is there such a disconnect? Like, why are the manufacturers doing something this way, but the enthusiasts, retro grouches, call them what you will, want it the other way?
I would say the manufacturers are going for performance. So they're really, you're talking about a good dual clutch, a really good automatic in a performance car. There's really nothing it doesn't do better than the manual. I mean, better launch, quicker shift times, smooth downshifts, you name it.
Fuel economy?
Fuel economy.
That's another huge issue.
So, if you're a manufacturer, why wouldn't you go dual clutch if it does everything better? And more people can drive it.
Well, and if you're selling cars, and some manufacturers are on the premise that this is the greatest sports car that you can buy. This is the fastest, the quickest, the best on the Nürburgring, everything like that. If you can take away factors that could potentially make the car slower, missing a shift or, losing grip because the front wheels aren't, powered, whatever the situation is, you can tell people, this is as great as it can be. The car is now, it can do this better if you let the car do it.
Yeah, and I submit that we might be actually guilty of this, in aiding this, because we test every vehicle. A lot of the manufacturers pay attention to that, a lot of the enthusiasts pay attention to that, and when it comes to things like 0 to 60 and quarter mile, if you do not have all-wheel drive, when you have a big horsepower vehicle, if you do not have a dual clutch transmission, you're off in the weeds. I mean, we test Vipers, we've tested things like the GT500 Super Snake. These are huge power cars, but with a standard 6-speed manual and a clutch pedal, they can't hope to compete against a car like the GTR or an Audi R8.
See, and I am all for the dual clutch transmissions. I love them. Everything about them is great. There's no downside to a dual clutch transmission. But I will say, like a Miata is a perfect example, that car should never change, should never have a dual clutch transmission. It needs a manual. And there is something, you'd mentioned the Viper, there is something about getting a run right in a 600-700 horsepower vehicle, getting the launch right, hitting your shifts right, doing it all by yourself. There is something about that. There is some satisfaction. Same with on a track, to where if you're in a dual clutch and you're hitting paddles, it kind of does it by itself. You got to make sure you do it at the right time. But there again, with the manual transmission, there is something rewarding about getting that heel toe and braking just right going into a corner. And when you get it right, there's not really any other feeling. But with all that said, again, the dual clutch transmission takes out so many of the variables that can miss a shift, wrong downshift point, things like that. It's hard to argue against it. And the people that are a lot of the people that actually have never really driven a true dual clutch transmission. Well,
I think you're talking about two different things there too. There's the absolute enthusiast. When I go out on a canyon road, a good manual transmission and rear-wheel drive, a Miata, on a Southern California canyon is fantastic fun. But if I'm on a racetrack and I want to set the fastest lap time I can, I know I'm going to be faster in a car with a dual clutch and all the active aerodynamics and all-wheel drive, everything else, than I'm going to be if I'm trying to do it myself. And more consistent, I think.
I don't have much use for nostalgia for old driving techniques. I mean, why not go back to hand cranking your car if you're that into it? I think it's really an issue of whether it's fun or not and how that solution's done. There's paddle transmissions, shifters that work well. There's some that don't. There's throttle by wire that works well. Some do, some don't. On and on and on. Even stability control, I think, is fine if it lets you enjoy the car up to a point where it helps you not hurt yourself. So I think it's a question of how it's executed, and I'm all for the latest technology, but the fun part is not whether it's, you check the box off, it has this, it has this, it has this. It's a question of whether it's fun. How well have they engineered this thing?
So whether you're a fan of these vehicles or not, I think they do present an interesting challenge, not only for people in the market for these vehicles, but also for us. And I'd like to take the opportunity that we have Kim here, our testing director, to talk about some of the challenges that a lot of these new age high performance vehicles present. Things like the McLaren P1, the LaFerrari, we're talking about 900 horsepower cars that do 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds and might pull 2 Gs in cornering. Kim, I mean, are we up to the task? Can we handle this kind of stuff?
Yes and no. Our test equipment has progressed quite a lot in the last few years. So now with GPS test equipment, you can measure a lot of data points in that 3 seconds to 60 and learn a lot about it. A lot of other instruments are cheaper these days. Electronics are cheaper than they used to be, so you can measure roll angles and chassis slip angles and all kinds of neat stuff like that, which was very difficult in the past for the likes of us to do. On the other hand, some other issues come up. One is in doing acceleration runs. The effect of that 1 foot rollout starts to loom larger and larger. That's something that's a historic factor in how our numbers have always been presented by all of us. And the amount of time that takes, which is about 0.3 of a second, becomes a bigger proportion of 3 seconds 0 to 60 time. So it starts to have an effect where back in the day when it was cars did 12 seconds to 60, it was not that big a deal. Another is just the ability to drive these cars. Recently we tested a very powerful car that it was a challenge for me to drive around the figure 8. It honestly was. And Carlos, I think, did a better job being a younger guy, but the car was actually going quick enough where I was having trouble seeing the braking spot to brake at the right time for the figure 8. So cars are getting fast, and it can be a challenge for even the likes of us. The other area, though, that I think about with testing is how do we deal with, again, modern electronics and stability control systems and all of these advanced features like that that control how a car performs. And that is a harder thing for us to do. That's really kind of the big looming question in the future. Autonomous cars. How do we test an autonomous car?
I think another part of the question too is, will it be still an issue? Are we getting to a point, Kim, where you can only put so much horsepower to the ground, you can only go around a corner so fast? Are we reaching a limit?
Right. I think that's exactly right. Yeah. I think that it really should move from those limit numbers. Years ago, you'd hear a car could do 175 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour. It's very impressive, or the 0 to 60 time keeps dropping. But it is, I agree, getting to the point where it's just irrelevant. Refocusing on the experience is a wise idea.
Well, it's something that we've just been dealing with lately. Tires make a huge difference in a vehicle. With those tires, though, you need extra heat. You need various things, and depending on what we're doing, if it's our figure 8 test, we do a handful of laps, give or take, 6, 7, 8 laps. A lot of these high performance tires, they're just getting up to temperature at that point, so does that mean now we need to do 20 laps before the Ferrari finally gets going and gets up to temperature and working at the operating temperatures that it wants to be? That's adding increase in time, and then if you don't get them up to temperature, we've seen a lot of tires that when you don't get heat into them, there's some spooky cars to drive. And when you're talking, again, 900 horsepower, hell, even some 500 horsepower cars that have cold, hard tires, you can get into trouble really quick, even with all these nannies that they have nowadays.
Right. So from talking about motor trend testing, I'd like to change gears a little bit and talk about a very special kind of testing that you went to go see, Kim. Recently you went to the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety and saw a Volvo being crash tested. How was it?
It turned out to be a fascinating 3 days that we spent there, and I was glad that we spent the whole 3 days there because you could really see the build-up and the whole process of what they do, rather than just showing up for the bang part, which is pretty quick, dramatic but quick. But the whole build-up, it's almost like a ceremony of how they prepare the vehicle and prepare the dummies. And the background of this test is it's a new test, a 25% frontal impact. The critical thing about that is that it turns out there's a lot of injuries and a lot of damage that occurs in this kind of test. And the reason why is because a car generally has 2 frame rails that extend forward, that absorb the impacts. And the 25%, it misses both. And it's really a horrifying thing to see because crushing comes right back. It takes the front wheel and often slams it right through the firewall, right into where your legs would be. The A-pillar buckles. And to make things worse, often the steering column shifts violently to the right, which takes the airbag with it. It's a terrible looking accident. It's really, alarming to watch. And so we went to watch the Volvo do this, and they've done a lot of homework. They developed some crush characteristics to the front of the car that can cause the car to not impact that way, but sort of slowly glance away. So it takes the front corner off the car, but it does it in a way that the whole cockpit is shifted around, sort of slides, angles off of it. And it's quite an impressive thing to see.
Yeah, I was very impressed with, actually, if we can, don't mind bragging a little, how the video story evolved, how it came out. In that it was very dramatic, definitely, but really the kind of super geeky, car nerdy stuff that I love. I mean, it's very easy. We do a lot of the Fast and Dangerous stuff on our YouTube channel. We talk a lot about Ferraris and Mustangs and Vipers and drifting and sliding, all stuff. But if you're a true car guy, I think the idea of crash testing and safety and what goes into these cars and all of the technology that makes this kind of stuff happen, makes it so that you can walk away from a crash as violent as this. To me, that's what's interesting. I don't know if you guys felt the same way when you saw it.
Absolutely. I mean, because especially in LA, the chances of getting into an accident are great here with our constant stop and go traffic. People always in a hurry because they're late.
Great drivers.
And those of us that have been in accidents before, I've been in a very bad car accident before, that basically hit almost kind of like their test. I had the front suspension basically flatten out the floorboard in the car I was in. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see that they're now taking, a look at this, and there obviously is a problem. It's going to be interesting to see who else gets on board with this in the 25%, and actually kind of what they do. How are you going to make this safer? I mean, you're going to add extra front end frame rail pieces to connect things to make the car bounce off. Then what's that going to do? I mean, there's a lot of different factors and variables that come into this.
Well, that's a very good point. When Honda launched the new Accord a few months back, that was a point they made, is that they knew this test was coming, so they added this extra bracing in there to do well on that test, and it did do very well. But then they said the car didn't lose as much weight as it could have if they hadn't been adding extra bracing for this. So if you're talking about adding weight, obviously that's going to affect fuel economy, that's going to affect handling, performance. It makes a difference even for us enthusiasts.
I think for the Accord, it'll be interesting, because it got the highest score in that test, and then its main competitor, the Camry, did not pass. And actually, if you watch that video, it's like Kim said, it's pretty horrific. So, it'd be interesting, for me to see kind of how if it affects sales. Is the Accord going to kind of, because these are family cars, these are people usually with kids. Safety is paramount.
Well, here's a question. Last question for the panel. Three of you guys are parents. Performance on these tests, is it something that you consider when you look into buying a car?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You will use the same word. A couple of observations while we were there. Many of the dummies are children, and you can't help but walk by the dummies of children and just sort of flinch a little bit and think about it. It has an effect on you. When that car struck the barrier, the Volvo did, it really is like an explosion, like a bomb goes off. The video does not do it justice, as good as the video is. And in that moment, my immediate instinctive reaction, having a family, was, I want that or something that can do as well as that car just did. It does have a profound effect on you watching a thing like this. It's such a dramatic experience to see that happen right in front of you with that energy, that explosion of material everywhere in the aftermath. When they're done, they take the car over to a turntable, and it's like a photo studio, and it's rotated around, and documentary pictures are taken of it. The doors are open, and you see all the airbags hanging, and the dummy's sitting in there still. Right. And there's paint that's been left on different surfaces because they paint the dummy up in the first place. And the whole scene is, again, it's disturbing, it's creepy. It's almost like there's a body in the car. It's not, it's a dummy, but it just reverberates through you watching this.
Right. All right, well, on that happy note, I think we'll just end it right there and say cheers, guys. Another great conversation.